He stepped away from the sermon notes, looked straight across the sanctuary, and spoke to one man as if the whole congregation, and the world, needed to hear. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell now so you get first-hand updates on this story and others as they unfold. When a leader with Bishop Patrick Wooden's presence decides to address his own child from the pulpit, it's not merely a family moment, it becomes a public event. The first thing to understand is how layered that single act was: intimate father-to-son language wrapped in pastoral authority, spoken in a place built for communal hearing. The reaction was immediate. People in the pews leaned forward, phones came out, the clip began its journey online. For many, it felt like watching a private living room conversation being amplified through a megaphone and replayed on a loop. For others, it was an instruction manual for how a leader should model accountability. Below, each main point is expanded and explored in depth, giving context, unpacking meaning, and following the ripple effects of that pulpit moment across family, congregation, and public conversation. What happened that morning read like a small drama staged on a familiar set. The sanctuary was full. The choir had just stepped down. The congregation was prepared for another one of Bishop Wooden's signature sermons, forceful, direct, and unapologetic. Instead, the bishop pivoted. He called his son by name and began speaking to him in a voice that mixed pastoral authority with paternal tenderness. That choice, to name the son in public and to direct words that carried both love and correction, instantly changed the meaning of the space. The pulpit, usually a platform for doctrine and exhortation, became the scene of a family exchange. That exchange was powerful because it compressed multiple registers into one moment: the tenderness of a father, the accountability of a mentor, and the gravity of a leader addressing an entire community. Each of those registers brings different expectations. A father is expected to encourage; a leader, especially one with Bishop Wooden's reputation for fiery sermons, is expected to challenge. The collision of expectations creates emotional tension, and tension is what people remember. Witnesses later described body language that reinforced the significance of the words. The son stood where sons often stand in the presence of their fathers, attentive, respectful, perhaps a little surprised, while the congregation watched a private moment unfold publicly. Phones lifted, clips were shared, and a moment that might normally be confined to family conversation suddenly entered a public loop of commentary and reaction. That alone demonstrates why the act was powerful. Public address turns private meaning into communal message. By speaking to his son in front of so many, Bishop Wooden converted what could have been a one-on-one exchange into an exemplar for everyone present. What a parent says about a child in private can shape a family. What a bishop says about a child in public can shape a congregation's expectations of family, leadership, and the standards they hold dear. Bishop Wooden's words were not a single note but a chord, carefully combined. He began with affirmation, pride in growth and accomplishment, and then layered correction and expectation over that warmth. In one breath he acknowledged the son's maturation, in the next, he reminded him of the responsibilities that accompany a public family name. This hybrid approach, praise sewn together with firm counsel, reflects a long tradition in religious instruction, the balance of grace and discipline. For congregants, hearing their bishop model that balance publicly has pedagogical power. It's a live demonstration of how faith communities might train their young, with affection, but not at the expense of accountability. The content of the message also told the congregation what mattered to Bishop Wooden. He emphasized that a leader's child is never merely a private person. Their actions carry symbolic weight. That may sound harsh to some, but for leaders who speak of legacy, it is a sober reality. When a family is tightly entwined with ministry, the boundaries between private and public blur. Expectations multiply, personal decisions become public examples, mistakes invite scrutiny, and successes become confirmation of a leader's teaching. The bishop's words therefore served multiple purposes at once. They were a father's encouragement, yes, but also a rehearsal of expectations for anyone thinking about stepping into a leadership role inside a faith community. They reminded listeners that love does not absolve responsibility, and that pastoral care sometimes involves correction as much as consolation. The decision to place this conversation on the pulpit stage was deliberate. A leader could have addressed a child at home, over dinner, or in private counsel. Choosing the pulpit signaled intentionality. This wasn't meant only for the son, it was also meant for the people. By placing the message in his primary sphere of influence, Bishop Wooden did two things. First, he made his fatherly correction a public ethic. Second, he underlined the truth that his family life and his ministry are not separate compartments. For many churchgoers, that integration is a sign of integrity. A leader who preaches certain values but fails to model them in his home loses moral authority. By publicly demonstrating that he applies the standards he preaches to his own family, Bishop Wooden provided a transparent example that supporters hailed as courageous. Yet the pulpit choice also opened him up to critique. Public correction can be read as public shaming, particularly when the audience includes cameras and social media amplifiers. Some argue that protecting one's children from unnecessary exposure is also an act of love. Others counter that shielding a leader's family from accountability risks creating hypocritical double standards. The bishop's move sits squarely in that tension. It made his role as father visible through the lens of leadership and forced the congregation to reckon with how they imagine the responsibilities of spiritual authority. Do leaders model accountability privately, publicly, or both? The responses from people in the sanctuary capture how symbolic the scene felt. Electrifying describes the emotional charge, a sudden shift from routine preaching to something with personal stakes. Intimate recognizes that, despite the crowd, the words were meant to touch bones that only family usually reaches. Together, those descriptors reveal why the moment stuck. It felt like an invitation into a private world, and that invitation carried meaning for those who would interpret it as a template for their own families. Hearing a leader hold his own household to the standards he preaches gives the congregation a tangible model. If the bishop can demand transparency and accountability from his son, then parishioners are more likely to believe those demands are not mere rhetoric but rooted in real practice. That has formative power. Parents watching may take away a renewed sense of responsibility to model faith at home. Young people may see that being part of a religious family requires more than inherited privilege, it requires intentional discipleship. The symbolic force of leadership starting at home is thus twofold. It underscores the integrity of the leader and it sets a higher bar for generational training and moral instruction. As the video spread, the reactions diverged along predictable lines. Supporters saw the moment as brave. They argued that transparency breeds trust and that leaders who practice what they preach deserve recognition. In their view, Bishop Wooden's public correction of his son was a demonstration of pastoral integrity and a refusal to hide family shortcomings. This camp framed the act as a necessary demonstration that no one, not even the bishop's child, is exempt from the standards of the faith community. Critics raised concerns about exposure and the ethics of public correction. They argued that some conversations are best kept private to protect family dignity and to avoid the appearance of spectacle. For them, the pulpit is a place for communal teaching, not personal correction. They worry that publicly airing family matters invites social media sensationalism, which can harm a young person's reputation before any private counsel has taken effect. Both positions have emotional logic. One emphasizes ecosystemic integrity, the community must see accountability modeled. The other emphasizes protective love and the vulnerability of youth. The debate itself points to a broader cultural tension about how leaders should balance transparency with discretion. Within hours, the clip, short, poignant, and resonant, had begun to circulate across platforms. That rapid sharing transformed a local pulpit moment into a national conversation. When a private exchange becomes public content, it enters a wider marketplace of meanings. Social media users debated not only the ethics of public correction but also the larger cultural themes the moment touched: generational conflict, the responsibilities of children of public figures, and the shape of moral leadership in an age of viral scrutiny. The viral spread also demonstrates the contemporary reality of ministry. Sermons are no longer constrained by the physical congregation. They are digital artifacts that can be replayed and reframed by audiences far removed from the church's immediate context. This creates both opportunity and peril. On one hand, messages of accountability and intentional parenting can inspire viewers who never set foot in the sanctuary. On the other, viral snippets often lack nuance. Viewers may see only a few seconds and draw conclusions without context. For Bishop Wooden's moment, that meant the initial clip functioned as an attractor for conversation, but the deeper meanings required longer-form explanation and the kind of contextualization the full sermon, or a careful report, can provide. One of the most common interpretations among attendees was that the bishop was using his personal example to teach a principle. In that reading, the sermon served as live pedagogy, a model of how parents and leaders should combine affection with accountability. The logic is simple and compelling. If leadership is more than rhetoric, if it is embodied in daily choices and family training, then a leader's home life becomes a primary classroom for the lessons he or she preaches. Bishop Wooden's public words to his son, therefore, operated as a lesson plan enacted before students. It offered a tangible demonstration on how to cultivate character across generations. This approach to teaching is persuasive for many who believe faith is transferred primarily through example. Pastors who insist that their children live by the same standards they teach are signaling that spiritual formation is holistic, not compartmentalized. For congregants who crave authenticity from their leaders, seeing family standards enacted publicly can be deeply reassuring. It tells them that the bishop's message is not mere rhetoric but a lived practice. Another vein of interpretation took on more prophetic tones. Some observers believed the bishop's words carried an implicit warning about the seriousness of legacy and the cost of stewardship. In this frame, addressing his son publicly was less about a single child's behavior and more about the broader responsibility of preparing the next generation for leadership. That interpretation resonates in religious traditions where succession and legacy are urgent questions. Who will carry the message forward, and how will current leaders form those who follow? Seen this way, the sermon becomes part of a strategic conversation about institutional continuity. The bishop's insistence on standards is not just parental tough love, it's a preventative measure meant to ensure that his family's influence will not be undermined by avoidable failures. This perspective reads the message as prophetic because it tries to foretell and shape outcomes. Prepare the young now, and you reduce the likelihood of fracturing or failure later. Speculation about succession is natural when a prominent leader publicly addresses a child in a language of responsibility and expectation. If the son harbors ambitions for ministry, whether inside his father's church or within the broader faith community, then the bishop's words may function as official preparation. Announcing expectations publicly performs two functions: it sets standards for the son himself, and it signals to the congregation that this young man is someone to watch and support. That is a strategic move, albeit one with pitfalls. Institutional acceptance of a leader's family member can ease transitions when a beloved figure steps back, but it can also generate resistance if congregants perceive the move as dynastic rather than meritocratic. The risk-reward calculus is familiar from organizational leadership. Appointing or preparing a family member for leadership can preserve continuity and maintain a unifying vision. Yet it can also provoke accusations of nepotism and catalyze schisms if followers feel excluded from the decision-making process. The pulpit moment, then, may be read as the opening salvo in a longer narrative about succession, a narrative that could either knit the community together behind an emerging leader or intensify scrutiny and debate. Finally, this sequence of events underscores a tension every public leader faces: how to be transparent without sacrificing family privacy. Leaders who maintain strict separation between ministry and family may avoid the glare of public scrutiny, but they risk being accused of hypocrisy if their private lives do not reflect their public teachings. Conversely, leaders who model transparency open their families to outside judgment and sometimes to unfair public pressure. Bishop Wooden's decision landed squarely in this tension. By choosing public correction, he embraced transparency and the virtues many congregants admire. By doing so, he also accepted the collateral effects of viral media and public comment. For faith communities and leaders wrestling with the question of how to train and shepherd the next generation, this moment provides a cautionary case study. It asks, when does public accountability become public show? How can leaders protect young people from needless exposure while still modeling moral seriousness? There are no perfect answers, but the conversation itself is necessary. It forces congregations to clarify what they value in leaders and how they will support families who carry public responsibility. What this moment leaves behind is not a single answer but a set of urgent questions. Bishop Wooden's public message to his son was at once personal and programmatic, a tender fatherly charge and a leadership demonstration rolled into one. It modeled courage for some, raised ethical concerns for others, and provoked a wider discussion about how faith communities prepare the next generation for responsibility. Whether you view the act as inspiring or problematic, its consequence is the same. It made visible the enduring challenge of balancing love, discipline, privacy, and public witness in a world where every pulpit moment can become permanent online. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. The conversations this sparked about accountability, legacy, and leadership will continue to shape how churches think about the future of their ministries.